This video is going to be a little bit different than some I've done in the past. It's not one of those wonky dives into strategies, Roth versus traditional investment strategies, timing, like those types of things. This is a video about some of the more qualitative aspects of finance. How do you live to enjoy your money? So I thought of this concept after reading the book Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia. It's a great book if you're into that kind of thing. But in the book, he talks about the concept of lifespan versus healthspan. And he defines healthspan a little bit differently than the medically defined term. So medically, they just define it as being free of disease and disability. He defines it more about generally how well you live. In other words, can you do what you want to do, how you want to do it, and are you mentally, emotionally, psychologically healthy enough to do that? So just as an example, let's say somebody lives to 98, that's their health span. But let's say also, hypothetically speaking, that person has some sort of significant physical impairment at 72 that confines them to their home for the rest of their life. Well, we would then define their health span as being 26 years shorter than their lifespan, which is obviously a tragedy. And I was thinking about that as it relates to money, and it struck me that there are similar phenomena that occur in personal finance, and I would call that lifespan versus wealth span, right? So in order to define lifespan, you would just define it the same way, how long do you live, but you also have to define then what does wealth mean and wealth span, and I will define it intentionally very broadly. I'll just say it's having enough money to live comfortably, happily, to live an enjoyable life. It doesn't mean you're free from any sort of issues. It doesn't mean you can buy a Lamborghini or a private jet, because that doesn't mean something to everybody. So wealth for different people could happen at $40,000 a year, and it could happen at $4 million a year. The other thing that you have to realize is for most people, that sliding scale of wealth over their lifetime will change as far as what it's dictated by. So for younger people, it's largely going to be dictated by their income, because that's going to determine their lifestyle. Whereas later on in life, if you live a traditional life where you eventually retire someday, it's going to be mostly dictated by your assets. So one of the things that looking at money in this context does is it forces you to look at how you would live your life in order to make your wealth span as long as possible. And what I mean by that is to have your wealth span start as soon as possible and end as late as possible, and in this case, hopefully never. And that's actually a lot trickier than it sounds, because if you plan to retire someday, you have to forego some level of current consumption, meaning you have to save some money now that you could have otherwise spent to make yourself happy in the moment. But you can't save so much now that you forfeit all of your current happiness, because that's just trading wealth span now for wealth span later. And spendthrifts do this exact same thing, but they do it in reverse, right? They spend all of their money now, and their wealth span ends whenever they no longer are gainfully employed enough to have the type of income that would support their current lifestyle. So hopefully this makes sense so far, but there's actually one characteristic that health span and wealth span do not have in common. And that's that people don't usually consider themselves as having excess health. In other words, somebody doesn't wake up someday and say, gosh, I just run too fast, I jump too high, and my metabolism is too good, right? But there are actually situations where people have so much money that they paradoxically cut their wealth span short because their wealth becomes a burden to them. And there are also simultaneously people who have enough money to enjoy a fulfilling life, but they don't know it, and so they unnecessarily deprive themselves of the things that they otherwise could have. Let me give you an example of this. Let's say we have a working class person that is making $60,000 a year, and they're saving a ton of money. They're saving a third of their income, $20,000. They're not having any fun right now because they're making $40,000 a year that they can actually live on, but they're doing it to enjoy some perfect mythical retirement at some date way out in the future, right? And let's say they do this dutifully for 30 plus years, and one day they decide to retire at 70 after having done this with several $million, right? Now, if you actually did that in the Vanguard S&P 500 index the last 30 plus years, I think you'd have something like a little over $3 million. If I take a 70-year-old with an average life expectancy, let's say hypothetically somewhere in the mid 80s, and I tack on a Social Security benefit that's probably over $30,000 a year, along with a nest egg of over $3 million, they could probably reasonably have an income of $180,000 to $240,000. And that might seem like a dream for somebody who lived on $40,000 their whole life, but is it really? So is it possible you're happy in that scenario? Sure, it's entirely possible. But what I found with a lot of people who learn to live in extreme frugality is that it starts out as a lifestyle and it becomes an identity. And frankly, that's a really great way to accrue wealth, but it's a really hard way to learn how to enjoy wealth. And it's oddly possible to have so much money that it eventually becomes a burden for you. A lot of people do that thinking they're going to spend all their life denying themselves of pleasures, and one day they'll be able to flip the switch only to find out that they can't actually flip it. And so what they end up doing is they spend the rest of their life trying to figure out how to get rid of all this wealth that they don't actually need. You see people messing around with beneficiary designations, changing their estate planning. They're not going to give it to their kids because their kids have enough money, because their kids are successful. Or maybe they're not going to give it to their kids because their kids are deadbeats and they don't want them to have it and they don't deserve it. And so either way, they end up in this scenario. Some of them even use it as leverage over their kids. Some people don't have kids and they have to figure out how to not give it to their deadbeat nephew because he doesn't deserve it. And they end up in this odd sort of a hellscape where they have significant amounts of paper wealth, but they've shortened their wealth span because now all they do is spend all their time trying to figure out how to get rid of all this wealth that they don't need. And I know that seems like a far-fetched possibility for a lot of people that don't have enough money, but I see it happen all the time. All right, so now we know what the pitfalls are, right? We know that spending too much is not necessarily great. We know that spending too little might not be great either. We know that trading Wealthspan now for Wealthspan later, or vice versa, can both be problematic. So how do you prevent that? Well, first of all, in the words of Morgan Housel, you have to figure out what enough is. What makes you happy and stick to that. And then you have to define that numerically in a financial plan. And that's actually a lot easier than it sounds, but a lot of people don't do it really for a couple of reasons. One is that people don't like grading their tests because they're worried they're going to be so far behind that they'll feel terrible about it, so they never go about doing it. And some people do it just out of laziness or ignorance. And so for a significant number of people, life is just a matter of floating on and going with the flow, and they're either going to say, I'm going to save more when X happens, or they'll automatically save whatever it is that their employer matches in their 401k. And one day these people all wake up, and some of them will make it on accident, and some of them will just have to accept whatever they've saved because someday they're sick of working and they're going to retire come hell or high water. So if you have a financial plan that's going to assume that you retire at a certain age on a certain amount of income, if you save what you're saving right now, and in the midst of all of that, you still have enough disposable income left to be happy, congratulations, you've made it into your wealth span. If you've done that in a thoughtful way with your financial plan to where you know that good or bad with returns, meaning using some type of Monte Carlo analysis, that you're going to make it, you're going to live with some level of comfort with that. And a financial plan is not going to solve for somebody who makes $30,000 a year and wants to live off of $10 million a year. But if you work hard, you get a decent job, or you start a business, and you're thoughtful and intentional about both your saving and your spending, you have an opportunity to be really happy for a really long time frame and have a wealth span that lasts decades. Never, never, never underestimate how knowing and trusting your financial plan can help you to enjoy your money now. Financial planning is not just for the future. So do it for yourself now. Enjoy your life as long as you can. Don't spend all of your time trying to figure out how to be happy at some future date. And I hope everybody found this useful. Like I said, it's a little bit of a departure from previous videos. If you did like the video, if you didn't like it, dislike the video. I know a lot of people like hitting that button. It doesn't actually show up in the public statistics, so take that. But if you enjoyed the video and some of the other ones we've done, subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments if you have some questions or some other topics you want us to cover in a future video.